Welcome to Defiant Nation Radio, where we defy the narrative that our culture is feeding us. We defy the idea that the scriptures cannot be trusted, and we defy the idea that the God of the Bible does not exist. We defy the idea that we have evolved from monkeys. At Defiant Nation Radio, we uphold the solas of the Reformation. We uphold the scriptures. We believe that salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. Defiant Nation Radio is the podcast ministry of EternityAtStake.com.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Defiant Nation Radio podcast. I am your host, Rex Smith. And ta-da, yes, I know. Who else did you expect, right? Well, I wanted to, again, all these, I'm always at such a loss for time. And so I try to bring stuff out that I've been studying, that I'm working on, putting together. Maybe I'm teaching on something or preparing, obviously, for the Christian Worldview Answer to Socialism and Social Justice presentations series that I'm working on. So that's why these are, sometimes the opening is very short and curt, and the ending is very short in the same way, but I want to get you guys information, and I want you guys, I know you don't have a lot of time to be messing around with stuff that doesn't give you the information, and so I want to give you that information in a nice package that's easy to use. So this one today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the SBC and some of the stuff that I've been looking at for years, tracking with, following the movement, but more so in relation to the whole social justice movement. And there are obviously many good SBC churches, Southern Baptist Convention churches, but we're seeing some of the people in the upper echelons have really taken a hard left turn, and we're talking politically, we're talking biblically, and things that should really concern us as far as leadership goes. And so, I've mentioned before, talked about how important the local church body is, and how important it is that you are there, you are active with your church body, you are caring for each other, you are loving on each other, being those hands and feet, being charitable, being merciful to those around us. That local church body is the most important thing. And regardless of whatever governing body, maybe you're Presbyterian, maybe you're Lutheran, whatever that may be, but your church needs to be teaching and preaching the Bible regularly. Verse by verse is obviously the best. The regular pop-up sermon's not a big deal, but walking through the scriptures verse by verse does something. It forces you to follow with the train of thought. I know Andy Stanley would say, hey, that's cheating. But Andy Stanley has a lot of other problems. Andy Stanley says we need to leave the Old Testament behind. We need to unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament. So we can deal with that another time. But as I studied the movement over years ago, I was kind of pointed to Richard Land, who is the head of the ERLC up until, I believe it's 2012. And 2012 then is when Russell Moore took over. And please understand, I believe there are many good people, even in the upper echelons of the SBC. I don't know, I can't remember if I've talked much about Al Mohler yet, but I love a lot of his stuff that he's done. But Al is starting to act a bit strange. And one of my examples that I would point to would be his little outburst at the Shepherd's Conference panel discussion with John MacArthur, Phil Johnson, Mark Dever, Ligon Duncan, and Phil Johnson was just tossing up these softball questions. Hey, you understand that social justice is wrong, and anything we do to mess with the gospel or add to the gospel really destroys and takes away from the gospel. I mean, just softballs, right? And Al's like, well, I'm not going to give a 140 letter or whatever he says, 140 word Twitter discussion here on the subject. And so, what was underlying that was many months, even a couple years of people watching what's going on, watching who is being supported, who is being lifted up. Revoice, the Sam Alberry stuff with the homosexuality, the LGBTQ stuff, and they're wondering, hey, Al, where are you standing on this stuff? Because we're watching Southeastern go crazy social justice. We're watching Southwestern go kind of berserk. What's going on, Al? Let's hear you come out against this. And John MacArthur was even like, guys, this is a serious issue. But again, I love a number of things that Mueller has done, just great stuff. But this is a time when he needs to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, or this is right. This is what I'm believing. This is what I'm teaching. And he has really steered this course very carefully, dealing with all the racial stuff. And instead of him coming out against some of the stuff that's come up, many pastors, from people I'm listening to, the voices that I'm reading, so the different states, looking to the ERLC, looking to Mueller to say, hey, conservative, evangelical, Christian belief is that the Bible teaches this, X, Y, Z, on the LGBTQ issue or abortion, stuff like that. And I think Mueller obviously still is against abortion, clearly against abortion. But some of the people he's tracking with, some of the people that he's pointing to, Russell Moore at the ERLC, just a mess. And so it'll be interesting to see where this goes in the next few years. But anyways, so I've been turned onto the SBC for a number of years, tracking with them, kind of tracking the thoughts of some of the leaders. J.D. Greer, I heard the other day, if you heard my last podcast on Tim Keller, J.D. Greer said the other day, hey, Tim Keller is my go-to guy. He said, what did he say? He said something like, I can, when I'm preparing a sermon, I pre-copy Keller's notes. So like I'll prepare a sermon, and then when I go and read what Keller says about this particular thought or passage, it's the same thing. So I got some crazy stuff going on. If you don't understand what Tim Keller's doing, then definitely listen to that podcast. But also start reading. Tony Brown has been doing a great series on Tim Keller and just pointing out very specific things. Here's what's going on with Tim Keller, so on and so forth. So with the SBC, tracking with them, trying to understand where they are. So tracking with Russell Moore at the ERLC, which is the Ethics and Religious Liberties Committee of the SBC. He's the head there. And so before him was Richard Land, come to Russell Moore. And we look back, and these guys have been working with globalists, George Soros being one of the main contributors to that Open Society Foundation, to erode our national sovereignty, to bring in as many illegal immigrants as possible. George Soros wants to get rid of all borders. He wants open borders and just get rid of all borders. He also one of the other pushes at the Open Society is the development of unelected supranationalism. So one of the reasons I started tracking with him a long time ago with Richard Land was tracking the kind of one world government, one world religion movement. What's going on there? What's happening? Who's involved in that? And Richard Land was arm in arm with him. Russell Moore, arm in arm with him. And I want to recommend to you a podcast, and I realize you don't have time, so I'm going to read some of this stuff. I'm going to tell you about him. I want to give you the link and everything. I'll try and put it in the notes for the podcast here. But his name is Michael O'Fallon. I've mentioned the sovereignnations.com website before. They had the great conference before G3 this last year on social justice. What is it? What are the pieces? What are they saying? And so Michael O'Fallon, kind of the main guy there at sovereignnations.com, but he has a podcast on there, and it's called, get the exact name here. The title on the page is Christianity in a Postmodern Crisis: The Causes of Things, Episode 5. And one of the things that I'm doing, if you've tracked with me, know what I teach, know what I study. Done a lot of study on cults, world religions. I have the Light Project. If you're interested in learning more about cults and world religions, I look at eight of those, and what do they teach versus what does the Bible teach? And it's really information to help you in witnessing, not just know about another cult or world religion, but to help you in witnessing to them. And so I'm always looking for the genesis of an idea. Where did it start? Why are we looking at right now the current state of the evangelical church? The conservative evangelical church is being flooded with social justice stuff. Flooded with, hey, we should allow all the illegal immigrants in. There should be no problem with that. If you think that there's a problem with that, you're a racist or you're a xenophobe. I'm going, what sense does this make? Where did these ideas start? Like, years ago you could go to the Methodists, you could go to a number of liberal denominations. The Episcopalians, they're already on board with that. They left the Bible a long, long time ago. And granted, you still have a few conservative Methodist churches out there, I know. But as a group, as a denomination at large, they left the Scripture. So they're all into, hey, earth care. We care about global warming. We care about the illegal immigrants. And this is not to say, understand, this is not to say that as conservative evangelical Christians, we don't care about caring for the earth. I think having dominion over the earth is one of our God-given rights and demands on our lives. But the whole global warming movement is being used to push us into a one-world government. And I would argue one world religion, with global warming being kind of part of the green side of that religion, socialism being the political side of that religion. But so anyways, there's all this stuff. How did we get to where we are? And obviously with the illegal immigrants, it's not that we don't care about them as a people, but if we allow people to just flood into our nation, the sovereignty is destroyed. Our laws make no sense. They have no bearing anymore. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that from what Michael is saying. We begin to be a nation of no laws. Obviously, Open Society Foundation, George Soros wants to tear the Western world apart, similar to Marx wants to remake it in the image that he wants, with these unelected officials on a worldwide scale. Heard today the Pope called for a governing body that is higher and more capable than the United Nations to rule the world. Obviously working with George Soros and those guys as well. So anyways, Michael O'Fallon, in this podcast, he will help you to understand how these things got started, how they came into the evangelical movement, the conservative evangelical movement. And so recommend you go read it, but I want to just give you some high points of it, and obviously don't want to plagiarize anything. You can go there to sovereignnations.com and check this out. But he's got a list of articles right there on the page with it as well, so you can go in and track with him as he's talking. He recommends that you're reading the article along with him. One of the first articles that he talks about, as you know, I'm trying to figure out, how does this happen? Well, he walks us through how this happens. And one of the first articles he talks about is called Call to Pause. Evangelical Men Join Women's Call to Hit Pause on Culture War. Okay, what's going on here? This is from July 18th, 2018. And we're going to go back to 2020, 2007, 2010, stuff like that, and walk through this. But this is kind of what's in our face right now. And just from that title, evangelical men join women's call to hit pause on culture war. I don't even have to know who it's from, automatically think feminism. Well, we're so far beyond feminism. The feminists now are getting mad at how far beyond feminism we are, because the whole feminist movement is being destroyed by the trans movement, the whole LGBTQ plus non-binary gender stuff. And so I saw the other day that a male, I forget how you're supposed to say it, but a born male female, so transgender female, but born male, came into a women's weightlifting competition and won all 9 categories and broke like 5 world records, something like that. And, feminists, even lesbians who are upset about this, are being excoriated by this whole new movement of culture warriors, social justice warriors. So anyways, this is Call to Pause. Evangelical men join women's call to hit pause on the culture war. And I want to read, this is kind of at the end of it's supported by kind of some who's of social justice warrior stuff. But this is a hit piece. Okay, there's a number of hit pieces. Russell Moore did a hit piece on Judge Roy Moore, as he was trying to get elected. This is a hit piece kind of on Judge Kavanaugh, who has now been in office, on the Supreme Court for a number of months now. Hopefully you tracked with that a little bit, saw the attacks that he was under, which is kind of interesting because so far he hasn't really proven himself to be that conservative. He's voted, I think, almost every time with the liberal side of the Supreme Court except for once. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But man, they were just dead set to destroy Kavanaugh with literally no evidence. But here's a hit piece on Kavanaugh, but also the culture wars. So this, you think about culture wars, this is, well, I'll let the article explain. Last week, a rising chorus of leading evangelical women called America to stop the Senate from rushing to confirm a replacement for Justice Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court. They called fellow evangelicals to hit pause on the culture wars. This week, a strong core of leading evangelical men joined the women's call. I have an issue there already. So there may be things that women are concerned about, that are passionate about. But if it's right, if it's correct, there should already be men, leaders, who are leading the way. If you're wondering, I hold a complementarian view on men and women, husband and wife. Do not believe that women should be pastors in any way, shape, or form. And so that already knocks me out of so many different camps, right? But so supposedly these strong core of leading evangelical men joined the women's call. So we got to stop the culture wars. It says, launched decades ago, the evangelical culture wars have effectively brought the nation to a turning point. The balance of the Supreme Court is poised to tip in favor of a conservative agenda for generations. Powered by a political strategy crafted in the 1980s by the moral majority and Christian coalition, conservative evangelicals have eyed the Supreme Court as a prime target of its war to overturn Roe v. Wade. So to overturn the abortion movement. Now on the brink of the political win culture warriors have dreamt about for more than 3 decades, evangelical women and women of color and their white evangelical allies are voicing dissent. Anytime you start using the term ally, you can automatically call them liberals. Automatically. White evangelical allies. Typically we hear this with LGBTQ allies. So you're an ally. You're accepting of everything. So supposedly, evangelical women and men of color and their white evangelical allies are voicing dissent. The only growing segment of the evangelical church, people of color warn. So the only growing segment of the evangelical church is people of color. and those people warn. The conservative evangelical strategy to dominate the Supreme Court will result in increased abortion rates, particularly in poor communities and communities of color. What's more, a conservative majority court poses an existential threat to the civil rights and protections gained through the civil rights movement. Hard data proves it, and evangelicals are saying no. Well, that hard data is not included in this article, and you will not find that hard data anywhere. There is no hard data to back that up. Somehow, by putting a conservative on the Supreme Court is going to increase abortion rates? How does that happen? What? Someone who is going to look at the Constitution and define it in the original with the original intent, that is somehow going to increase abortion rates because they might deem it murder if you're slaughtering babies? That somehow increases? But then we have the racism. The racism is played. So supposedly it will increase abortion rates, particularly in poor communities and communities of color. Because he's probably a racist, right? So he would be against communities of color and people who are poor. And there's an existential threat, they say, to the civil rights and protections gained through the civil rights movement. At this point, you should just be scratching your head going, where do you get this from? Where does this hard data come from? How long have you been working at making this information up? Sometimes it just flows out of them. This is very critical. I cannot stress it enough. You have got to read and listen to Dinesh D'Souza. Got to. Dinesh D'Souza. Watch his documentaries, read his books. You've got to understand the issue of racism in America, what was going on, and what was happening. So we hear, the KKK they're the right wing. Well, no, the KKK was the militant wing of the Democratic Party. Again, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to be able to understand the KKK was the Democratic Party. Many of the blacks that were lynched, Dinesh D'Souza points out, many of the blacks that were lynched were the conservative black people. They were the ones being lynched. But what do we hear today? Well, the right, they're, this existential threat to the civil rights and protections gained through the civil rights movement. The right, they are the racist. Well, they'll even say, there's a big switch that took place in the 60s, and a big switch. So the racists jumped from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party, never dealing with their own history, ever. But there's this big switch that took place. Where's the evidence for it? Doesn't exist. Bubkiss. Nothing. Nada. No evidence for it whatsoever. And you've got to read him. PragerU has done some great videos on this. This is an area where the church, people in the church have been slow in tracking and understanding history and being able to answer these questions. And that's why what Dinesh has done has been just a huge service to everyone, but especially to those in the church, because we have stuff like this going on. They go on, abortion rates for American women have hit an all-time low, but they've increased among poor women because economic hardship is the primary driver of abortion. Now, I just had an article pop up on my news feed the other day on Facebook. Somebody posted it. This is from 2014. And the title of it is, this is from IllinoisFamily.org. It's posted at several different places, some of the information about it. But this is from a former abortion clinic owner. She said, "We created demand for abortion by pushing sex ed on kids." How did they create demand for abortion? By pushing sexual education on kids. This is sexual education in our schools. Parents, you have got to know what is going on in your child's school. You've got to know. How do you sell? Read a little bit from the article. How do you sell an abortion? In the U.S., it's very simple. You do it through sex education. Former abortion clinic owner Carol Everett told participants at the Rose Dinner following the National March for Life on Thursday in Ottawa. She ran a chain of 4 abortion clinics in Texas from 1977 to 1983, where approximately 35,000 unborn children were aborted before her dramatic conversion and departure from the abortion industry. She says this: "We had a goal of 3 to 5 abortions from every girl between the ages of 13 and 18 because we all work on a straight commission inside the abortion industry. With every customer, Everett became a little richer. But in order to reach her final goal, Everett said she had to create a market for abortions. So it's not just poor people, okay? And I believe that if you go back and study the history, you will find that it has always been a struggle to get poor people, and specifically black people, to have abortions. And that was one of the reasons that Margaret Sanger joined up and tried to force her way into the African American churches to convince them that they needed to have abortions. Huge push. Beg you to study it, okay? We can talk about that in a whole couple segments in and of itself, but she had to create this market for abortions. She said we do this several different ways. She said we started in kindergarten. This is back in the 70s and 80s, okay? She says in kindergarten you put the children in a circle and you go around the room and you ask them all the same question. What do your parents call your private parts? You know and I know that every family in this room has a different name for private parts. So by the time you reach the 3rd or 4th child, it's clear to those children that parents simply do not know what they have. But we did. We said, boys, this is what you have, and girls, this is what you have, and don't be ashamed of your private parts. She said everything was calculated to separate the children from their values and their parents. By 3rd grade, children were shown explicit how-to diagrams of intercourse. By 4th grade, children were encouraged to masturbate either alone or in groups of the same sex. It is during the 5th and 6th grades that Everett herself supplied the missing link between sex ed and abortion. She said, quote, my goal was to get them sexually active on a low-dose birth control pill that we knew they would get pregnant on. How do you do that? You give them a low-dose birth control pill that, in order to provide any level of protection, has to be taken accurately at the same time every single day. And you know, and I know, there's not a teen in the world who does everything the same time every day. She said a girl on a pill who thought she was safe typically had sex more frequently than those not on the pill. She said that pill would not work, and we would accomplish our goal of 3 to 5 abortions between the ages of 13 and 18. That is for every girl. We're 20 years down the road. Oh, I'm sorry. We're 30, 40 years down the road from that story, from her sharing that story. Do you think we're in trouble? Do you think that the call to pause has a point? I say no. I say this is a messed up movement. But I want to come back to a couple lines that I read. In the article it says, the only growing segment of the evangelical church, people of color, warn. And this is what Michael O'Fallon hones in on. And so this what happened then out of this grew, and this is multi-denominational, but the SBC is part of it, grew a seeker-sensitive movement to appeal to people of color. And not just people of color, but specifically those who are drawn to social justice issues. Social justice issues. So it's interesting that people of color they're saying they're coming into the church. Where would they hear about social justice issues before coming into the church? Well, they would get that from their socialistic Marxist teachers in their schools or on the news. Where else are you going to get that from? Well, then they're coming in the church. They say, hey, well, let's utilize social justice and basically create a new seeker-sensitive movement with those people. Now, Supporters, by the way, supporters of this article were George Soros, Jim Wallace, the founder of the Sojourners Ministry, which is supported by George Soros, the open borders guy, one world government guy. Jamar Tisby, who's a vocal liberation theology promoting black man, a frequent contributor at the Gospel Coalition and Desiring God. Now, he then goes on to explain the genesis of this movement. Okay, this is what's critical. This is what I wanted to get to. At about the 7-minute mark, Michael explains that there was, in 2010, at the SBC convention, a gathering of SBC leaders. They were at the Rosen Center Hotel, and this is where he heard the first notes in support of the new open border policies of the Barack Obama administration. Their argument was, white churches just aren't keeping people in their pews. But we do see millennials, Asians, and African Americans attending urban churches that are concerned about themes such as social justice and ending oppression. And from that we see that these people are on the rise. And anytime you have a church growth movement that is driven by numbers, you have got to watch out. There is nothing wrong with wanting to get more people into your church, more people hearing the gospel proclaimed at all. Nothing wrong with that at all. But we've got to realize that if we are just driven by numbers and we're not driven by the gospel, then we have nothing. As believers, it's a broken model. Okay? So then they argued. So as he goes on, the argument was that because the culture is changing, then we, the church, must be relevant in the coming age if we hope to exist. And boy, have we heard this. I mean, you go back to the seeker-sensitive movements. You look at Rick Warren. You look at all the seeker-sensitive churches that grew out of that. And I mean, this is just a continuation of that model. They then argued that because illegal immigration is happening, it's already happening, then we might as well join them because the current growth models just aren't going to work anymore. So, because people are leaving the church, right? We're watching 70% of our kids walk away from the church, and depending on who you listen to, the numbers might be a little bit higher than that. And so many white evangelical churches are shrinking. How do we increase these numbers? Well, we begin to appeal to seeker-sensitive ideas, and here being the social justice movement. And the goal, to help bring illegal immigrants in. And they always say, we want to help churches connect with the immigrants. Well, if churches are carrying out the Great Commission, they're finding ways to connect with immigrants. They're out on the streets, they're sharing their faith with people, they're loving on them, they're the ones who are feeding and clothing them while they're sharing the gospel with them. You'll find plenty that are feeding and clothing them, but not many sharing the gospel. And if we're not sharing the gospel, we're not doing it right. It's not what we're called to do. We're called to preach the gospel. And so the company that Michael worked for, you say, okay, well, that was a meeting, Rex. Well, he was there because the company that he worked for was an event organization that was contracted to work with global socio-political organizations and with supposedly conservative political organizations. You might have heard them called neocons. And then to follow, so he's there because he is a mover and shaker. He's got the connections, right? They want him there so they can connect into these NGOs, these governmental organizations, these conservatives. They want to change the conservative mindset on illegal immigration. And they wanted to meet his influential Christian clients, is what he said, from the meetings. And from then on, he began to hear in meeting after meeting how this plan would be put into place. And he was already already knew this was a bad idea in the beginning, but then it grew and it grew and it grew. One of the articles that you'll find on that webpage that I gave you for Michael O'Fallon's podcast is the NIF, National Immigration Forum, 2012 Impact Report. And this is back when Richard Land was in there. back in 2012, Richard Land said he was ashamed of the Republican Party in the 2012 presidential election. And the kind of often unsaid is the whoever you voted for, the conservative or whoever the Republican candidate was, I can't believe you voted for them. And it's not always said. Sometimes it's said. Thabiti Anyabwile said, hey, Bernie Sanders would be the best one for the African American community. Communist Bernie Sanders? That guy? Hillary Clinton, Russell Moore supported Hillary Clinton, had tried to bring her in to speak at the was it Southern Baptist Convention. I think I mentioned it last time. What? What's going on, guys? So, anyways, Richard Land was ashamed of the Republican Party. Well, Richard Land was working in cooperation with the National Immigration Forum, which was funded by George Soros, and their program, which is called Bibles, Badges, and Businesses. So you have who's funding this? This is Richard Land, ERLC, powerful committee portion of the SBC. He is working with the atheist one world government guy to destroy borders, bring in unelected officials, and end national sovereignty. Does that make sense? In what world does that make sense? I can read all through the Old Testament. There are plenty of borders. God establishes borders for the Jews in Israel. There's no problem with borders. Oh, but we're preached to get rid of the borders. So it's funded. This group is funded by Open Societies, which is the George Soros Mothership Foundation, along with the Tides Foundation, which their goal is to forge a new consensus on immigrants and American forum. That's from Richard Land's document, from the NIF document. And he's got a link to that. You can go and read that impact consensus. And it's all, oh yeah, we're working with evangelicals. Evangelicals from all over the place are coming together. And the conversation is being changed. What's happening? People are being lied to or duped. From the NIF 2012 document, it says, our strategy brought together influencers across the political spectrum to change the polarized immigration debate and increase support for rational and humane immigration policy reform. They keep talking about the broken immigration system. Well, why do they say it's broken? Well, because we can't get enough immigrants in fast enough. It's a known thing that immigrants will overwhelmingly vote for, I think it's like 70-80% will overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. And so they want to bring in this whole new voting block. Hopefully you've been tracking with the current voting situation for 2020, where they're trying to say, hey, felons should be able to vote. Felons who, rapists, murderers, things like that, they should be able to vote. Why? Because they're going to vote for the Democrats. Slogans that we hear coming out of the NIF document, currently coming out of these things, caring for the immigrant is a gospel issue. Forget that they're breaking the laws. Forget that they're breaking the laws of our country. It's a gospel issue. And if you don't believe in it, if you don't welcome the illegal immigrant, then you're a racist. You're a xenophobe. Then we see Russell Moore took over the reins in 2012. He regularly met with Obama, Jim Wallace, and who's who of the whole illegal immigration, bring as many in as we can. Then in 2013, the EIT, the Evangelical Immigration Table, was launched as a natural outgrowth of the Bibles, Badges, and Businesses program. So they wanted to they wanted to bring together the three groups to allow illegal immigration. Bibles, they wanted to get into churches. Badges, they wanted the police to stop carrying out their duties and capturing or prosecuting illegal immigrants. Look at what they've done to ICE, and you've got sheriffs and police in a number of places saying, hey, we're not gonna take them in. And then businesses, so getting businesses to support this idea. And so the growth out of the NIF movement, out of the Open Society, all that is this Bibles, Badges, and Businesses program. And the EIT was launched as an outgrowth of that movement. Who do we see in this movement? We see Russell Moore. We see Matt Chandler. We see Jim Wallace, the socialist, so on and so forth. Now, I know I'm not doing this justice. I know that I am, and apologies to Michael O'Fallon for maybe butchering his ideas and stuff, but I wanted to get to you where this stuff started, when it came into evangelicalism, and why does it seem like it just popped up out of nowhere. I don't know if you've seen some of the videos, but people that 10 years ago were saying, we're openly coming out against social justice and socialism. 180 degrees, now they're all for it. But we as God's people, we need to be able to deal with these issues. So, as I mentioned before, we're talking about, with the current social justice movement, we're talking about the attacks from illegal immigration, right? We need to have open borders, allow anybody in, because supposedly that's what Jesus would have done. We have racism, all the white guilt. White people need to just shut up and sit down and listen. They're saying, if you're colorblind, that's a racist thing. I mean, all this stuff that has been worked towards, they're coming out against. This is kind of like what's happening with the feminist movement. The feminists are now being attacked by the more advanced feminists, or whatever. I don't have a good name for it yet, but I'm sure somebody's come up with one. I'll try and find it. But we're so far down the postmodern road where there's no truth. Oh, that's another thing. Michael O'Fallon talked about in these meetings leaving the correspondence theory of truth. Okay, so that means truth corresponds with reality. Okay, if I drop this bottle, it's going to fall. Truth corresponds with reality. I can make those statements ahead of time because I know what's going to happen. And they've actually written articles about this now. But he's seeing this back in 2010 and 2012, where now we've heard it said that we shouldn't keep talking about facts. We shouldn't keep trying to talk about facts with black people, with the social justice warriors. It's more about feelings. We need to be dealing with feelings. And I would argue it's both. Realize that it is feelings that are greatly affected here, but we can never leave facts, because this is what the whole postmodern movement was about, was leaving facts behind, leaving reality behind, and ultimately to destroy the scriptures. You get back into deconstruction, the 1800s, you come modernism in America, and then postmodernism. All this is is a way to get rid of God. That's what it is. It's a way to get rid of God, a way to get rid of the scriptures. And here we have these conservative evangelical leaders buying into it, or they're selling it. They're so far gone themselves. But anyways, go to his website, check it out, Michael O'Fallon, sovereignnations.com, and listen to his podcast there. I apologize for this being so long. I got into a number of details, but you just got to fill these holes in and poke the holes in their ideas as you're going. Otherwise, you kind of lose the issues. But go listen to his podcast, Christianity in a Postmodern Crisis: The Causes of Things, Episode 5, and listen to the whole series on social justice there on his website, sovereignnations.com. You will not be disappointed. And keep studying. Dive into the scriptures. Understand what the scriptures teach regarding all these issues. So I was coming back to illegal immigration, racism, LGBTQ issues, global warming. These are all parts of the whole social justice movement. They're all pushing us towards a one world government, a one world religion, and we need to be aware of it. We need to be aware of what the Bible teaches in all these areas. So dive into systematic theology. Get Frame's systematic theology, get Grudem's systematic theology, dive into these things, Berkhoff's systematic theology, start reading, start studying about who God is, who Christ is, and understand the history of Israel, understand what was going on in as they're coming out of Egypt into the promised land, and driving the Canaanites out. Understand what that stuff is, and what's going on there, and God's plan and God's purposes through everything, because those are going to then inform how you live out, how you interact with these ideas today. So anyways, great time, big topics, heavy topics, but we've got to understand what's going on, and so we can better know how to answer it. But anyways, go and serve your King. I will talk to you guys later. Thanks. Bye.
If you're interested in learning more, preparing yourself better to witness, go to the website eternityatstake.com. We have several series on there. One of them is Maps from the Ancients. It covers manuscripts, archaeology, prophecy, science, and the resurrection. How do we know the Bible can be trusted? It's great for a homeschool study, great for a Sunday school class, great for an adult or teen class as well. We also have the Light Project, where I look at 8 cults and world religions, examining them. What do they do with God, with Christ, with the Bible, with salvation, heaven, hell, and things like that? Check it out today. Thanks for listening.